Hello, everyone. My name is Christos Makridis. I am a research professor with Arizona State University and a digital fellow at Stanford University's Digital Economy Lab. It's such an honor to join you all today. This is such an important journal that has been developed. The Journal of Government and Economics fills a crucial void that has been lacking across the social sciences. Governments are being held to an even higher standard these days, and it's going to become increasingly important to understand the role that they play in the marketplace and understanding how public policy can be made better and ultimately drive greater value for people across the world. So with that, let me transition over to my slides to present this paper, and I'm just so grateful again to the issue from the Journal of Government and Economics. So today I will be presenting research from this paper, Why is there a public-private pay gap, and trying to understand, is it the way that it's been typically framed, namely that public sector jobs earn less than private sector jobs, or is it potentially the other way around? Just to provide a little bit of context about this literature, there's been this large debate and question, at least in the United States, about how to attract and retain skilled workers within the federal government, especially within the technology sector. There have been a number of papers, including by Goldenoff 2015, Levicki et al. 2014, asking this question, and other countries have also pointed towards this skills gap. For example, Murphy et al. 2019 talk about this in the context of the United Kingdom. Bargan et al. Talk about it in the context of France. And many have argued that the culprit of this is low pay within the federal government, most notably this study from Donahue in 2008. And so what we are asking today is compensation the culprit behind this gap in the federal government versus the private sector, or is it potentially something else? To provide a little bit more background about this area, I want to begin by pointing out that there has been a surprising lack of quality empirical work investigating this public-private pay gap. Most of the available studies are only utilizing cross-sectional variation. And as I will talk about in the 10 to 15 minutes that remain, this cross-sectional variation is potentially highly endogenous, correlated with selection effects that are going to contaminate causal inference. Several papers that are worth pointing out are this President's Pay Agent study that came out in 2012, talking about a 26% pay gap between federal and private sector jobs. However, Andrew Biggs and his co-author Rich Wine in 2011 used the current population survey and find that federal workers actually earn more controlling for education, occupation, and other person-specific demographic characteristics. There is also another large literature within public administration that talks about public service motivation. These papers really emphasize the non-pecuniary characteristics of government service, i.e., what else comes with government service besides the financial component. Barry Bozeman and his co-author Sue in 2014, as well as Rich et al. In 2016, are good survey papers that talk about this broader literature. But more specifically, Holmberg et al. In 2015 talk about the association between job satisfaction and public service motivation. Pitts et al. In 2011 find, not surprisingly, that job satisfaction is crucial for understanding job retention. And so it's not just about financial compensation, it's also about how do people actually feel about their jobs. Feeney et al. Feeney in 2017 talk about the role of non-pecuniary characteristics. And lastly, Christensen et al. In 2017, Esteve in 2017 talk about how can the federal government leverage public service motivation as a rationale for why people should pursue careers within the government sector, and how to leverage that to maintain high retention and high engagement among their employees. However, this paper is going to depart from some of these prior papers in a couple of ways. Most notably, it's going to be leveraging panel data from the IPUMS higher ed dataset. This data from IPUMS, hosted out of the University of Minnesota, combines data from multiple different surveys, namely the survey of doctorate recipients, the National Survey of College Graduates, and a survey of recent college graduates. this is going to provide panel data on a representative skilled workforce. There's going to be a number of survey waves between 1993 and 2013, and it's going to contain demographic characteristics. It's going to contain compensation information, including on benefits, not just financial compensation, but also non-wage compensation about healthcare, about other benefit plans relating to retirement benefits, etc. And lastly, it's going to contain information about non-pecuniary job characteristics, including how people feel about their underlying job satisfaction. Lastly, for certain robustness exercises, cross-sectional data is also going to be included, namely from the American Community Survey run out of the Census Bureau, as well as the American Time Use Survey run out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, both within the United States. I just want to begin by providing a little bit of demographic characteristics about the sample. I'm not going to go through all these differences. These can be found within the paper. But what I want to emphasize are the differences in salary. Notably, if you look in column 1 and column 3, you see that the mean salary in the government is about $68,000 per year, whereas in the private sector, it's about $76,000 per year. Now, these are skilled workers, and as a result, these are high salaries in US dollars. But the key is that this is just the raw data. We are not controlling for differences in education or differences in job characteristics or any differences about the underlying types of occupations that the workers are in. However, this is meant just to point out that in the raw data, it is the case that in the private sector, they earn more. The question is, once you control for other observed and unobserved factors, do you find this result as well? And to do that, we're going to take a regression-based approach where we regress a measure of compensation as the outcome variable on an indicator for whether or not the person is in the public sector. We're then going to control for demographic factors at the individual level, as well as a semi-parametric set of flexible job-specific characteristics. The way that we're operationalizing that is by introducing indicator variables, about 10 different indicator variables about the underlying tasks. And these indicator variables denote whether or not the individual spends over 10% of their time in certain activities. Lastly, I'm going to control for individual and time-specific fixed effects. The beauty of this regression-based approach is that it's not only controlling for various demographic factors, job-specific factors, but it's also controlling for individual-specific heterogeneity, because we observe individuals that are moving across jobs. We see an individual when they're in the private sector and then they move to the government sector, or they're in the government sector and they move to the private sector. This within-person heterogeneity is absolutely crucial for identifying the causal effect of being in government on compensation and controlling for the wide array of potentially contaminated unobserved heterogeneity, namely selection effects that could be correlated with productivity. One of the reasons why unobserved heterogeneity is so important is demonstrated by this plot. All I'm doing in this plot is looking at the distribution of earnings in 2 different occupations, database and systems management and buyer and purchasing agents. The key takeaway from this plot is that when you look within occupation, there is significant heterogeneity. You see people earning $30,000, you see people earning $150,000. And so just because you can control for occupation fixed effects does not guarantee that you can control for all the unobserved heterogeneity that might be correlated with selection effects. Therefore, moving to panel data at the individual level is very important. So the first main result, and this is the headline table of the paper, is that when you regress logged earnings on an indicator for whether or not the person is a government worker, column 1 shows indeed you do find about a 3.4% lower annual earnings, lower salary, even after you control for age, gender, race, education, and so on. Column 2 subsequently adds in occupation fixed effects and year fixed effects. And you can see again that this gap actually widens to about 4.3%. However, when you control for individual fixed effects in column 3. When you're looking at changes for a given individual, that coefficient flips to 3.9%, suggesting that actually government workers earn about 3.9% more than their private sector worker counterparts. And moreover, column 4 controls for other job-specific characteristics, namely these indicator variables for whether or not an individual spends 10% of their time doing sales meetings, 10% of their time doing programming. And in the paper, you can see in a full enumeration of all the different job-specific characteristics. But the key here is that this is a very flexible way of controlling for unobserved heterogeneity. Moreover, there are many other benefits beyond financial characteristics that could be present in a government job versus a private sector job. And so what Table 3 does here is it looks at a rating of healthcare benefits, pension benefits, profit sharing, vacation, and overall benefits. And what you can see here is that government workers actually have higher levels of benefits overall, about 0.167 standard deviation higher healthcare benefits, 0.352 standard deviation higher pension benefits, lower profit sharing benefits, but that's not very surprising, higher vacation benefits, and higher overall indices on these benefits. And so what this means is that in the prior table, where we're looking at financial characteristics, it's actually an underestimate of total compensation differences because of these higher benefits that government workers tend to have. Moreover, when you're trying to understand what drives differences in job satisfaction, this data set also enables us to do quite a bit here. And so what Table 5 is doing is regressing overall job satisfaction on a wide array of job-specific characteristics, career advancement, benefits, whether somebody finds their work challenging, whether there's independence, the location, whether they have responsibility, and so on. You can see that salary is only one component of these overall differences in job satisfaction. And so in Table 6, what I do is I look at, can differences in these job characteristics explain differences in pay? And so I regress the pay differences on whether or not an individual is a government worker, and then I control for all these job-specific characteristics. And so in column 9, you can see that, and this is very important, when you look at salary differences, these salary differences disappear after you control for these job-specific characteristics. While there still is a positive coefficient, it actually becomes statistically insignificant. And so this suggests that differences in the job characteristics account for these differences in pay and therefore behave as a compensating differential in the labor market. One concern with these results is that you're looking at overall salary, not wages, not the hourly wage. And as a result, it could be that government workers work more than in terms of hours per week than private sector worker counterparts. Quite the contrary, it's actually the case that public sector workers tend to work less hours per week than private sector workers. And so all that Table 7 is doing is it's using data from the American Time Use Survey and regressing time allocated to work activities on an indicator for whether or not whether you're a government worker. And we control for a wide array of individual characteristics, occupation fixed effects, and year fixed effects. And you find that there are about 15% lower hours worked on average. And even when you look at skilled workers in column 5, i.e. people with a college degree, it's actually an even larger difference, a 20% difference. So with that, I'm so thankful again to have the opportunity to have presented today. And the main takeaway from this paper is really trying to understand what role does pay play in government jobs versus other non-pay characteristics, namely the career advancement opportunities, whether or not you have autonomy in your job. And the result from this paper shows that government workers really value non-pecuniary characteristics, not just pay. So if we're trying to look to promote retention and attracting new workers to federal service, we should care about these other characteristics. So with that, thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to joining you another time in the future. Goodbye.